2018. I am your host, Al Mahmood, and we'll be speaking about the decline and revival of Islamic history. Islam has a rich tapestry, a rich history of which the world over are in debt. We wouldn't have phones, glasses, modern chemistry, algebra, maths, culture, medicine, and the list goes on without Islam. Renaissance philosophy was inspired and continued from Islam, despite them obviously rejecting Islamic history. Legal maxims, works in social science, historiography. The founder of sociology was Ibn Khaldun. Trading and exporting of advanced skills and vocations like pottery, soap making, glass making, all came from Islam. The surprising thing is that the great scientists, mathematicians, philosophers were all religious scholars, deriving their innovations from Quran and Sunnah. Islam has given so much but receives no credit. Whilst the world was in the dark ages, Islam was in the golden ages. We live in this world with Islam being the evil of the time. It is being promoted as backward. We have female genital mutilation, forced marriages, anti-science ethics, no discourse allowed, Sharia is cruel. These are just some adverbs and phrases chucked at Muslims by mainstream media and people alike. But this is not the case at all. Terrorism, extremism, violence, lone wolves, all are words that are negatively attributed to Islam. Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Pakistan, Somalia, Nigeria, oh my God, the list goes on. Countries, all of these countries are in destruction. The media is against Muslims. The far right is rising, which means that there is xenophobia and Islamophobia and fear of Muslims across the Western world. But Muslims were once great. The world looked towards Islam and Muslims to learn from. We need Muslims and non-Muslims alike to understand the true Islamic history. There are many who are trying to revive Islamic history across various platforms. And to help me understand this and to answer many questions is one such person, Sister Nafisa Kara. Assalamu alaikum, sister.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me. What a powerful introduction, subhanAllah.
Thank you very much. So Nafisa Kara is the founder of the Islamic History Project, an initiative dedicated to empowering Muslims through history. She has a degree in history and politics and is an aspiring author currently working on her upcoming book. So let's just go straight into it. Why did you create Islamic History Project?
Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So, like you said, I'm the founder of the Islamic History Project, and I founded this initiative because I was a student of history all through my school education, so GCSE, A-level, into university, and I was always kind of waiting for Muslims to be mentioned during my studies. And subhanAllah, it just never really came. Like, we used to do so many different modules on different topics, different periods. We did the Crusades, we did, medicine through time, all these different subjects. And Muslims were just always kind of erased from the period or not kind of mentioned properly. And this kind of built like a huge frustration in me while I was going through these curriculums. And I always felt that my identity as a Muslim was not validated through the history I was being taught. So I think this build-up of frustration made me, come to a point where I was like, you know what, I need to do something myself. And I tried to be proactive, and I founded this project, subhanAllah. So since then, I've been like writing articles, hosting like radio series, doing TV interviews, writing a lot. So yeah, it's been a blessed journey so far, alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah, that sounds brilliant. And I suggest everyone to go on her Twitter, her Facebook, and her website to check out all the articles. Some really great, inspiring historical articles there, especially about the Mali, which were coming on later, the Empire of Mali. So something you touched upon there about identity. So some people say that Muslims are suffering from an identity crisis. Now, I guess the question arises, do we understand ourselves through our history?
Of course. History is so powerful. History makes up our religious identity, our ethnic and social identity, and it's a source of strength for a community. Marcus Garvey said, a people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, or culture is like a tree without roots. And I absolutely agree with this. I feel that this ummah, we don't have our roots like embedded into the ground because we don't really know who we are. Like, we don't know our past.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess we can start off from somewhere, which is Muslims were in Europe for centuries. I mean, since we're here, a lot of Muslims are in Europe. We have 3 million Muslims in the UK. Many obviously are immigrants. Many have also some have also converted from the indigenous population, or the original indigenous population. So for us, I guess there's this idea, and as you said, the history books, the ones we study in school, does not actually relate to and actually expose students and pupils and teenagers to the fact that Muslims were in Europe for centuries and centuries before this wave of immigration in the 60s and 50s, 60s and 70s. So I guess what I want to understand is a bit on Europe's Muslim past. So if you could enlighten us, the viewers and the listeners, on this. Everyone, if you'd like to come and have a comment, you can find us on Facebook live, YouTube live. Our student number is also 0333 011 6786. That's 0333 011 6786. You can also tweet us at Ramadan FM 2018. You can also check out our website www.ramadanfm2018.com. So please, if you could tell us, Sister Nafisa, a bit about Europe's Muslim past.
So when we speak about Islam in Europe, there was two waves of kind of Islam that came into Europe. So let's just kind of backtrack a bit. The Prophet Muhammad passes away in 632, and by 732, the Muslims have reached to France. So there was actually a battle called the Battle of Tours. We know that in 711, Muslims had taken over the Iberian period of 100 years. This religion that originated in the deserts of Arabia spread across the world in such a short space in time, and actually reached up to mainland France in this battle, which the Muslims were defeated in. But Islam flourished in the Iberian Peninsula, in Spain, in Portugal for hundreds of years, and in 827, Muslims enter Sicily, they enter Italy. So that was the first wave. And then between the first wave and the second wave, there was the Crusades, which I think is probably like the most common period that we hear about Muslims in Europe,
Right.
if any, if only. And the second wave is the Ottomans, who kind of took over a lot of the Balkans, Eastern Europe in the 1400s. And they actually reached to Vienna.
Right.
So, subhanAllah, not many people know that. But if you go to many of the Eastern European countries and also Vienna, or some of the main cities, you'll see Ottoman architecture, and even minarets that have been converted, like kind of old masjids that have been converted into other kind of for other purposes. But there is a legacy that is left in these countries, and we can see that all over Europe.
Definitely. I mean, I was watching a show on BBC, a documentary. I forget the title, but it was about the Silk Road. And he was an art historian, and he went and traveled from China all the way. Well, he started in Venice, and he went all the way to China, all through Muslim lands, and then from China all the way back again. And it was absolutely astonishing the amount of influence Islam had on across the region, from China all the way. I mean, in Venice, actually is hidden but there's actual artworks that shows Muslim caricatures that show. I mean, there's a house. Literally, it's I think it's the house of the Muslims, they call it. I mean, that's a translation. I don't know what the Italian or the Venetian term is for it, but it still exists today, and it's an historical artifact. They have statues of Muslims all around Venice, but you need to have the right eyes to see it. So
yeah, there's a lot of kind of like Arab architecture and Muslim architecture in Venice as well, like with the arches, and there's some statues, and some carvings that are very like Arabesque.
Definitely.
And that is from the legacy of Muslims, which is just another kind of another example that, you know, when Muslims did take over lands, you know, it was not to kind of loot the land or enslave the population or, you know, rob the resources. We really did kind of build civilization and build, you know, centers of learning and institutions, and we tried to benefit the lands that we entered, and that was a great motivation for Muslims when they did go into new lands.
That's very interesting. So essentially people, especially Orientalist historians, they actually try to paint Islam as spreading by the sword, not by the pen, which is what we purport. And they also say that when we went, we completely changed the situation of the countries. But what you're trying to say is actually, no, there was centers of learning, there was entire architectures that were created, essentially a civilization was created wherever Muslims went. Whereas in colonial history, which is a recent history in the last 300 years, we know that it was the divide and conquer. It was to completely de-establish the madrasa and the vilayat faqih system that we had across the Muslim world. So there's a massive contrast between how the West had then colonized Muslim lands and how the Muslims had previously colonized the Western lands. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so this is something I always have to face as a historian, because there is, you know, obviously that's always thrown at me, you know, well, Islam was spread by the sword. And, you know, I just gave you them dates just a minute ago, how Islam spread across the world within a period of 100 years. And it's like, that is not possible for Islam to conquer by the sword in that short space of time. You know, Muslims were the flag bearers of justice in our past, and it was a religious and social motivation for Muslims to provide justice, fairness, and social harmony to the world, not just to their own communities, but to the world. And, you know, there's parts of Islamic history that are, you know, problematic, and there's parts where we have been in error, we have, you know, we have had downfalls and etc. But, you know, just because like Muslims are in control of an area does not mean it's a utopia. Yeah. And I think that's what the expectation is a lot of the time, that, you know, well, Islam has to be perfect and Muslims have to be perfect and Muslim rule has to be this Jannah on earth. And it's not going to happen. Yeah. Like, you know, Muslims are human beings. You know, dynasties become corrupt. You know, it was Ibn Khaldun who wrote in the Muqaddimah that, you know, dynasties have a natural lifespan like individuals. And it's a dynasty that grows up and passes into an age of stagnation and then into retrogression. So just like with life, like things rise and things fall, you know, Muslim empire did that as well. It's left for us to take like great lessons from.
That's really interesting. I want to expand on the point that you just made about Ibn Khaldun. So he says that obviously, I mean, the way he speaks is he kind of anthropomorphizes civilizations and dynasties as humans. Like there's a birth and then there's a death. But I guess my question is, what would be the factors that lead to the demise of basically a dynasty or a period or a country or a nation of Islam?
So I guess like through my studies I found that there's like always a few commonalities between like why Muslim empires fall. One of them is obviously, you know, wealth. So once, you know, wealth becomes you know, in the kind of hands of Muslims, you know, over time, you know, with certain corrupt individuals will kind of take this wealth and, you know, put it in their hearts, which, you know, is something that, you know, we believe, you know, wealth should be in the hand, not the heart.
Yeah.
So, you know, this has happened to sultans of the past. This has happened to, you know, the emirs of, you know, Cordoba and, you know, Islamic Spain. So this is one kind of downfall that we've had, is that we've kind of started to love the dunya. Right. But there's also kind of an aspect of trying to mimic the West or trying to mimic Europe, and that's one of the downfalls of the Ottoman Empire in particular.
Right.
As the Ottoman Empire went into decline and Europe rose through colonizing the Americas and other lands, the Ottomans felt their weakness, and what they started to do is kind of think, do you know what, we need to be more like Europe.
Right.
And there was even an instance at the end where like Islamic dress was banned, and they started to kind of wear military European uniforms.
That's
so it's
really
just
interesting.
stuff like this. But that's just a small example. But it was kind of the notion that, you know, we have to start being like others.
Right. I mean, that's really interesting because in Russia, when Russia was going through the Tsarist reformations across many centuries, one of the things, because Russians actually wore something, I mean, traditional societies wore, like, we have thobe, like very loose clothes. And in Russia, they used to have that type of very loose clothing, especially women, men. And then once the Tsars had started to actually have, I guess, communications with the Western Europe, they started to realize, actually, wait, we're a bit far behind. Or they wanted to advance their modernization, and they actually changed the entire dress code. They changed the language, they changed the structures. I mean, there was a top-down, forceful approach. And the same thing happened in the Ottoman Empire. That's just, it makes so much sense now about mimicking others and how the effect it has right down to the populace and actually on your own polity. So that's really...
Yeah. No, of course. And I think, like, one of the reasons why it is so problematic, you know, there's no problem adopting other cultures.
Yeah.
But I think the reason why it's so problematic is because these states, these caliphates were founded upon, like, Islam and the principles of Islam. And that was the fundamental motivation, was to, you know, for the survival of Islam, the spread of Islam. So when that's your initial intention, and then as time goes on, you know, things become corrupt, families are, you know, killing each other for power, which was another thing that was happening in the Ottoman Empire. You know, sultans were killing, you know, their nephews and all sorts. When this all starts to happen, and then you feel that weakness in your own identity, and you start needing, you know, another kind of identity to mimic, to empower yourself, I think that's a recipe for disaster.
Definitely.
And in many respects, we do that now as Muslims.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, because that then goes back to my original question, which was the identity crisis. So essentially an entire caliphate suffered from an identity crisis because the sultans and the elites essentially suffered from that. Is that a justified approach? Can I say that? Is that correct?
Yeah. In a lot of respects, there was like economic aspects as well. Like, you know, the West, Europe was becoming very wealthy because they were colonizing like a lot of the, you know, different lands. So that kind of decreased the power that on the world stage that the Ottomans had. But interestingly, like, even though the sultans started to mimic Western culture and European culture, the Turks themselves, like the subjects of the Ottoman Empire themselves, remained very Islamic and very conservative, and Islam motivated them till the end. So that was really interesting. And obviously, like you said, I think you said it in your introduction that, you know, many of the madrasas, many of the dargahs, many of the Sufi brotherhoods, all these centers of learning and this cultivation of knowledge that Muslims produced, was when the Ottoman Empire fell, these things were all closed down. We lost a lot of we lost so much from this moment in history.
Definitely. I mean, we'll come back to the Ottomans later. You know, lots of people are watching Derlish Urturul and these series now. We've got a big wave on that, but you know what? We'll do that after the break. So let's go into a break. If you want to contact us, you can contact us on 0333 011 6786. That's 0333 011 6786. You can also tweet us at Ramadan FM 2018. Comment on the Facebook Live. Comment on YouTube Live, and, you know, all those social media platforms. Tune in after the break, where we'll be discussing the effects the Islamic Empire has had on the world, the fall of the Ottoman Empire, and you know what? How do we revive Islamic history within our children? Because that's something really important. So tune in after the break.
Contact us on 07415 474 185.
Usman needs the adhesive to work. If not, his day will be a disaster. Ah! So, Usman, if you really need something to bond, grab a tube of CT1 from your local stockist. An incredibly powerful sealant and construction adhesive that's fast, flexible, and strong. It can be used anywhere, even underwater. For more info, ct1limited.com or follow us on Facebook or ring us on 0208 555 1448.
In an age of technological advancement, mass communication and social media, having the right website and app can be the difference that your business needs. AppSite Tech are here to take your business to the next level. No matter how simple or how sophisticated your requirements are, our technicians will work with you to create a bespoke website and app for your organisation. Call us now on 07538 081212 or visit appsitetech.co.uk and book your free consultation now.
Amigos, the signature name when it comes to burgers and shakes. Our succulent burgers are prepared in front of you while you wait. Whether you go for the 6-ounce Mexican or the 10-ounce Texan, or you decide to go for our messy fries or buffalo wings, one thing you're guaranteed is quality. We've also got a range of desserts including our trademark shakes in all your favourite flavours. We're based at 400 Cranbrook Road in Gants Hill, so come down to dine in or order in on Uber Eats or Just Eat. Amigos, hats off to great burgers.
Ramadan FM 2018.
The voice of British Muslims.
Hey, तैनू 20 बारी आके आता क्रिकेट ना खेलिया कर तो फिर विंडो पंच हो रही है.
Don't worry, Dad. Our windows need changing anyway.
हाँ तो पैसे तू दे से ना.
Nah, don't worry, Dad. UK Windows will sort it out.
UK Window? Oh, कौन है ना?
They're the best double glazing company about. They do windows, patios, French doors, sliding doors, UPVC, aluminium, you name it, they've got it. We can go see them at 51 to 53 Upton Lane, Forest Gate E79PA, or call them at 07984 440 093 or visit ukwindowslondon.co.uk.
वाह जी वाह, ये तो कमाल है यार. UK Windows
Zindabad.
Thinking about selling or letting your home? With Maxwell Estates, you don't need to look any further. Well established with over 15 years of experience, Maxwell Estates are specialists in residential sales and lettings.
Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back. We are discussing the decline and revival of Islamic history. I am your host, Daud Mahmood, and you are live on Ramadan FM 2018. Today we'll be discussing with our guest historian, Sister Nafisa, from Islamic History Project. So before the break, we were discussing essentially the Muslims, Europe's Muslim past rather, and I guess we're still suffering from an identity crisis because of our lack of understanding of history. I guess that's the conclusion we both have come to. So that leads me very well into the next question is, what effect did the Islamic Empire have on the world?
Great question. So we can see from examples like in Al-Andalus or in even the Ottoman Empire, like we were discussing before the break, that, you know, Islam was a real catalyst for change when it entered land. And Muslims were seen very often as liberators, as emancipators. And, you know, the Muslims had this, you know, we still have it now. Our religion charges us with this energy to create culture, create civilization, and we took over these lands and we transformed them completely. And it's, you know, the history doesn't lie. You know, we started agricultural revolutions, we created industries, we irrigated lands such as Spain. You know, before the Muslims came to Spain, in particular, like the landscape was so dry.
I didn't know that.
It was very dry, and especially like the kind of the south of Spain, which is very mountainous, very hilly.
Yeah.
And it was the Moors, it was the Muslims who took water from the flat lands somehow up these mountains and irrigated these lands, these hilly lands. And you know, Spain would not be what it is today without the Muslims.
Wow.
We gave so much to that land, subhanAllah. And you know, if you read about Cordoba, in particular, Cordoba became a mega city, like a super city. And there's a lot of Western writers that actually write about that period. And when the Muslims kind of were expelled from Spain, there were Western writers, Western scholars and academics that actually fell into like despair and sorrow. Stanley Lee Poole is one of them, but there's another, Gustave Le Bon, who's a famous psychologist, and he writes, if only the Muslims would have conquered France, it would have been like Cordoba. You could walk through the streets and people would know how to read and write and recite poetry.
Wow.
He writes, for 600 years we depended on Muslims to translate Greek. And if you think about it, Cordoba had hospitals 700 years before Paris did.
Wow. SubhanAllah, that's amazing.
So it's this information, it's this knowledge that we need to tap into, because, there's so many questions around us right now, like, why are there so many Muslims in the West? And, we're still treated as foreigners, like we're still treated as, these alien people, but we've been here for so long, like our states have had so many kind of relationships with the West, even with the UK, with Britain in particular. I'm not sure if you know about this, but in the 1570s, Queen Elizabeth actually at this moment she was like shunned from the Catholic world.
Right.
She embraced Protestantism.
Yeah.
And she actually went to the Muslims for help. So she started trading with the Muslim world, and that was a great kind of way that she preserved herself, was to become friends with the Muslims. So even as early as the 1500s, like we've been trading so much with Britain in particular, and that's when a lot of Africans, Indians, Turks, like Muslims, basically came and settled in cities like London.
Yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. I just want to reiterate for the listeners and the viewers that what Sister Nafisa has just told us, that is it Queen Elizabeth, right?
Yeah.
So Queen Elizabeth, once she converted from Catholicism to Protestantism, a bit of a tricky word to say, she was shunned by the Roman Catholic Church, and she was then ostracized by all the countries, France, Spain, Portugal, all the various empires that were coming to rise, and especially by the Vatican City, by Rome itself. And so she, obviously, there were famine, there was economic downfall upon the British populace. And where did they turn to? They turned to the Muslim lands, they turned to the Ottomans, they turned to the northern African Muslims for trade. And it's completely, I can see why you were, I had the same thing when I was studying in school. It's just not written in our history. I mean, we study about Britain, we study about, the colonialism, we study about, the slave trade and things like that. But we don't study about how the impact the Muslims had within Britain, or not necessarily that, or maybe it could be worded in a way where it says Britain's exports and imports, or Britain's economic relations with Muslims. I mean, this is such a significant part of British history that's completely overlooked. I'm just so amazed by all of what you've said. And I guess the next part would be, we have the rise of colonial powers in Europe, and I guess the question is, what is different and what was different about the Muslim empires compared to other empires that we've had in the past?
So, like I've said, for example, with the Roman Empire, they had their model of empire was very much so that you enslave the foreign populations to exploit the wealth into Rome.
Right.
So there was these kind of, the model was that you kind of take the wealth from these various lands and you pump it into Rome, and Rome becomes the kind of the hub, or the central power. And with Muslims, this just wasn't the case. At many points in our history, there were various caliphates like side by side.
Right. Yes.
So there was power sharing going on, and they weren't necessarily fighting each other, but they kind of existed alongside each other, which kind of speaks a lot of the intentions behind Muslims.
Right.
and also the unity and just the kind of fact that we didn't want to fight each other a lot of the time. This at other moments this did definitely happen, but for example, Al-Andalus was kind of under Umayyad control when the Abbasid Caliphate was in Baghdad. So
yes.
That's just an example of how there were power structures side by side.
And did that ever cause any issues? Because, I mean, nowadays, Muslims are fighting Muslims left, right, and center. One country is not speaking to the other country. I mean, we had the entire Gulf region ostracized in Qatar. So is this a remnant of the past, or is this something altogether new?
I think many of the problems we face today is more a kind of conflict of nationalism,
right,
and of conflict of our kind of civic identities. Because I think one great loss that we did suffer when the Ottoman Empire fell was the loss of that unifying force that we are Muslim and we stand together as Muslims. The Ottoman Empire were great defenders of a lot of the Muslim lands.
Yes.
Palestine's one of them.
Definitely.
There was 600 years of peace in Palestine with Muslims, Jews, Christians living in harmony. So it's this type of like how we've moved so far away from believing in our own power structures,
right,
and placing faith in models that don't necessarily suit us as Muslims. So adopting like Western power structures and nation states. And if we think about it, like, nationalism, our nation states are very weak. And
yes, definitely.
nationalism has plagued the Muslim Ummah in so many different ways. It's about, a lot of my effort, a lot of my passion is in reviving that sentiment that, we are Muslims, we stand together, and we are a global Ummah. I think we need to revive that.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's brilliant, because the Ummah, I mean, on Jummahs, when I did the khutbah, I've done many speeches where it's like, there is no more Ummah because everyone is so divided and segregated. No one really cares about anything. I mean, look at what's happened in Palestine, and how many of the Muslim countries other than Turkey has risen and really taken a really strong stance. Pretty much no one. And if they have made a stance, it's just more for aesthetics rather than actual realities, and actually trying to change and impact what's happening. And not just in Palestine, we have places in Nigeria, we have Somalia completely destroyed, we have Kashmir, all over the Muslim world, we have destruction and decay and chaos. And you're right, it's because everyone just cares about their civic nationalities, and they don't care about the wider image of Islam and the wider Muslim populace that goes beyond the borders. I mean, look at Syria. Syria is completely destroyed internally, and Saudi does not want to take any Syrians in. They've only taken 1,000 to 2,000. Same with all the Gulf countries. The only country that took them in was Jordan, Lebanon. That's because they're bordering countries. Turkey has taken 2 million. So it's just unthinkable when Islamic history, as you have told us, was all about trying to help the refugees. And I mean, when the potato famine happened in Ireland, the Ottomans sent shiploads of potato until Britain did a embargo to actually prevent Ottoman ships reaching Ireland. So it's the history. We're not learning from history, essentially. I mean, how do we learn from history? How do those people in power actually learn from our history? Because they're doing everything opposite that the Muslim rulers have done and Islam teaches.
That's a very difficult question, because I think obviously we have like the spiritual aspect of connecting with Islam again and becoming educated in the Islamic sciences, the Islamic fields. But I think there's a whole kind of emotive side to our identity which we don't often tap into, and that's a way that Islamic history can help.
Right.
Our Islamic history provides us with a sense of belonging and provides us with that brotherhood, that sisterhood, that
yes,
ummah identity.
Definitely.
That's what the Islamic history creates. And I think that's what's in decline, to be honest. As we've been colonized, as we've been broken down as people, our Muslim mindsets have been broken down. So much damage has been done to us, and then we've become these nations that stand alone, and we have all these individual problems we face, and we've become kind of selfish in how we organize our countries, how we run our countries. And I think, you mentioned Turkey. You mentioned, Turkey were one of the nations who stood up when it came to Palestine.
Yeah.
Like, if we look at Turkey now, Turkey's becoming so connected with its Ottoman history.
Yes.
And a lot of the humanitarian work that they do and the political statements they do are very reminiscent of their Islamic history. So that is one example of how our Islamic history could actually help, like, us as nation states and as political powers to tap into that kind of past that we used to help each other. I was just researching earlier. I was just looking at a document, and it was the Rohingya people actually sent funds to the Ottomans for help when they were going through a famine at one point in history.
Wow.
And I just thought, subhanAllah, that just blew my mind. Like, the Rohingya people came together and saved money to send to the Ottomans, subhanAllah.
That's just amazing. I mean, you brought on the Ottomans, and we were going to talk about the Ottomans. So I guess I'd like to start. I mean, the Ottoman Empire was one of the longest standing empires within human history. It is the longest empire within the Muslim history. And going back to identity, I mean, I never had any intentions of making this interview about identity politics, but it's turning out to be such. So I guess the question is that the divide of or the creation and the promotion of nationalism, especially amongst the Arabs, some say, and a lot of people actually purport and actually really promote this, especially within academic literature, is that the Arabs were never happy under the Ottomans because they could not accept that the Turkic people who were seen as, because they were hired swords at a time before they became the Khalifa and the rulers. They were the hired swords of the Arabs. So they couldn't accept that those hired swords, essentially henchmen, were now ruling over the entire Arab lands. So is that true, firstly? And secondly, if it is or isn't true, is that reminiscent of what we're feeling today? Because there's still that Arab-Turkish divide. There is still that. There is still those issues.
I think to some extent there is truth in it. Like, there was kind of a divide and a conflict, like a small conflict there, in terms of just kind of this. To be honest, it's quite silly if you think about it.
Yeah, it is.
Like, I think it's kind of exacerbated by Orientalists a lot, kind of to exaggerate the conflict. I don't think it was as bad as we're told.
Right.
But it's just one of them things we need to accept as Muslims. There's going to be nations from amongst us who deserve to carry the flag of Islam and deserve to be in power at different stages, and that's just part of life. That's just part of the rules of the dunya.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, carry on.
Oh no, you go.
So I guess this revival of Ottomanism that's really being pushed through. Now many say it's by the Turkish state, by Erdogan himself, by whoever that may be, but there is a sense of Turkey trying to reconnect with its history, because when Ataturk came in, he changed, the language structure from the Persian writing towards the English Latinized format. He changed the dress sense. He publicly, to show people it was okay, he publicly used to drink alcohol. He created he publicly allowed breweries to be open. So, some say it's a remnant of the decline of the Ottomans that he just continued that, but actually, in fact, he was actually a big promoter of this resurgence of this new Turkey that would fit a European model. Now, there's no issues with fitting with a European model per se, but I guess there's this sense that the Turkish people are really feeling this disconnect with their own history. Now, this revival of Ottomanism is coming through. Many people are saying that Erdogan is really pushing this hardcore, and this is going to help him stay in power as a president. And then he later on, now he's becoming a president, next will become a Khalifa. Where does it stop? But I'm not going to go into that. We're not going to discuss that. That's for the political shows. But I guess it's Dölüş Ertuğrul. Let's talk about that. You've written an article about it. You've posted lots of tweets about that. people are watching it. I mean, I know sheikhs are watching it. It's, you know, everyone is watching it.
It's really taken the Muslim world by storm.
It has. And I guess, I mean, I've watched a few episodes. For me, I'm just going to say no spoilers because I haven't watched more than episode 19. But I find it a bit slow. But one thing I found absolutely amazing, and it'd probably be the reason why I'd rewatch it, is the morals and the ethics and the way that, you know, like when they greet someone and when they sit down and the respect and, you know, the fact that they're showing a janaza, you know, happening. These things you never see in Western films, in Hollywood, let alone you'd see within normal Turkish, Pakistani, Indian dramas. And it's just so... I think that's what people are attracted by. It's the romanticization of our ethics within, you know, physical or rather visual format that's never been done before. So, I mean, Dervish Ertuğrul, should people be watching it or not? And how true is it to history?
So I personally think it's a fantastic show. Like, I absolutely love watching it, and I recommend it to everyone because I think that the image of Muslims portrayed, like, on these like in these TV series on the screen is so powerful. Like, you know, there's been so many instances in our lives. We probably read parts of Islamic history, even Seerah, even like so many aspects of our Islamic history we've tried to connect with through reading a book, and it just doesn't quite happen for a lot of people.
Definitely.
Because we are a people of, you know, we are glued to our screens now. Like, everything is media, everything is a smartphone or a podcast or, you know, a series. And I just think it's so positive and powerful that we have this series that portrays Muslims, and in particular Muslim men, in a positive, in a just, in a kind of honorable light. You know, we at the end of the day, we're Muslims living in the West. We watch TV probably every day. We watch Netflix. And how many examples do we have of positive role models like that relate to Muslims?
Definitely. I mean, it's so minimal.
We're always the terrorists. We're always the you know, the aggressors, the people who harm others. And it's so unhealthy for us as Muslims, you know, living in this world today. And it's particularly unhealthy for our youth. So I just think that this show is really positive because it kind of gives us an alternative to watch, but also it comes back to identity. You know, it's about identity building, and it's the portrayal of Muslims in our past that is very centered upon our morals, on our ethics.
Yes.
And the show is very charged with like Quran ayahs and hadith, the kind of stories of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And I think that's fantastic as well.
I mean, from the 19 episodes that I've watched, and a lot of spoilers that, you know, my family have told me about, so it just makes no sense for me to watch it now. I know everything that happens, but you know, I guess when they're traveling from where they were, and then they try to go to Aleppo, and I just want to going back to I don't want to go back to identity politics again, but just to go back to that kind of time, that kind of the issues that they faced, that, you know, Ertuğrul and his tribe, they faced an issue by the Arabs in Aleppo. You know, the Khalifa, he wouldn't let them in because the Crusaders, they had manipulated his courts and had manipulated him essentially. And then there was this divide from Muslims, within Muslims, but done by the Crusaders. So essentially what I'm trying to say is, how true is Dervish Ertuğrul?
So we have to remember it is a historical fiction. So it is a TV show. It is entertainment, and a lot of the kind of like not the situations, but the relationships between people are, you know, not necessarily true. It is a TV show, but the main gist of what is happening is true in terms of, like, Ertuğrul did, you know, marry, you know, Halima. He did have children with her. His progeny did come kind of from that marriage. Suleiman Shah is a true figure. You know, a lot of the characters, Turgut, a lot of the kind of main characters, they are true figures. And it's very difficult to extinguish between what's truth and false because, number one, this period in Turkish history was very oral, so it's stories. And, you know, if you've met the character Waldimir yet, he's a perfect example of how stories were told and how history was narrated.
Yeah.
It was through storytelling. So that's one thing. The second thing is that everything written about this history is in Turkish. So essentially only the Turks can unlock what is true and false for us. But I have been researching it, and I am going to be writing some articles on what's true and false and the various characters and where they're buried and so on and so forth. So watch this space, because inshallah I really want to do some research into this, because I just think obviously if we're watching it we should know what's true and false.
And that's exactly, I mean, at home and with my friends and people who've been watching it, I've just been debating the fact that, how true is it to historical context? Because we know, unfortunately, I mean, we've studied this within our Ottoman modules within history at university and places where, as you said, it's because it's oral, and when the Ottomans came to existence, they needed to provide a justification for their existence, and therefore they actually, I guess, romanticized their own stories and created more and more stories. And in the end, from the truth to the realities of the actual stories, there's become no difference. And I guess that's something, as a historian, you must really have to be looking into that quite carefully, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Even in terms of where some of the people from this period, for example, Ertugrul and some of his Alps, they're actually buried in Sogut in Turkey, in central Turkey, and even distinguishing between which are the correct graves of the Alps, and of we have to look at the dates, we have to look at the stories of where the deaths were. We have to look into all of these things so we just know where we stand when it comes to kind of distinguishing between truth and what's false. But I think ultimately it's a very positive show, and it just shows the power of the screen and the power of image and visual aids.
Definitely.
History has long been a kind of subject that is so extremely boring for so many people.
Yes.
The experience of history has been very negative, and I think with a mindful approach, we can extract a lot of power out of these types of shows and engage people back into their history.
Yes, definitely.
Not necessarily focus on just the entertainment aspect, but engage people in knowing the real history. I know many people who, from Ertugrul, have gone head first into the history books now, because they love the show so much that they're researching everything now. And they're messaging me and sending me links saying, check this out. And it's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, and I think the reason why it spurred fire across the Muslim world, in fact, across the Western world, across the entire world, is because people wanted to relate and have that, we were talking about the break between between us now and our history. And I guess what Dervish Ertugrul and those other dramas like Suleiman the Magnificent they've done, and many other dramas that they've done, it's about reconnecting ourselves with our past. Now, obviously, those are done there regarding Ottoman history, but it's still Muslim history. It's not Turkish history. It's Muslim history. And so I guess that leads me to my next question. And I've got a couple of comments that have come through, so I will ask those couple of questions that have come through. For those of you who are trying to phone in, we are having some technical difficulties with the phone, so please do tweet us at Ramadan FM 2018, or go to Facebook Live and comment on the YouTube Live, and we will, inshallah, ask the sister. We are running out of time, I'm afraid. But I guess my next question is, we've spoken about the revival of Ottomanism. Such a hard word, Ottomanism. What effect did the fall of the Ottoman Empire have on the Muslim world, and do we still suffer from it today?
So, subhanAllah, we should have named this the Ottoman show or something.
Yeah.
It seems like we should do a whole nother hour on this.
Definitely.
But I think for Muslims, the fall of the Ottoman Empire was a very sad moment in history. If you have read into it, if you do know about it,
yes.
It's a moment that we lost the ability or the capability to organize ourselves as a united Muslim force or Muslim bloc, let's say. And we also lost the passion and the vision to create our own power structures based on Islamic principles and with the Islamic direction. So it was the moment that we lost faith in our own way, on our own selves. Like, literally, that's how it was. Because, you know, when the Ottomans fell, no one wanted to step up to the mark after that. No one wanted to challenge any authority in the world. And it's like we lost our defenders. We lost, you know, the last kind of institution of power. And I think, you know, I think this is a really interesting discussion to have, because the notion of a caliphate, the word caliphate has become so negative.
Yes, definitely.
In the mouths of Muslims now, even, that we believe that this is like a dirty word almost. And this is because of like the Western media, but it's also because of like extremist fringe groups who have adopted this word and, you know, have used it in a negative way. But we need to go back into our history and remember that, and rediscover what a caliphate means and what a caliph is. And we need to connect with that word and reclaim and redefine our definitions, because there's so much, you know, at the end of the day, Islam is a political and a social religion.
Yes.
And we do believe in retaining our own power and our own institutions, our own structural institutions of power. And I think that's where we've completely given up on that aspect of our faith, to be honest.
Yes, definitely. And I mean, I guess I would comment here. I am quite aware that we have run out of time, so I've got one last question. I'm sorry for those who did comment. Inshallah, you know what, I'm so excited about this topic. I think we should have another show on this and discuss entire Ottomanism, because actually a lot of people have actually commented, I want to know more about Ottoman, so we'll inshallah look into that. But my comment would be on what you said, is that the fall of the Ottoman Empire created a space, and it created the division of creating nation states which never existed before. It created boundaries that never existed. Entire tribes were disbanded in half across these artificial boundaries that were made through many different pacts and treaties and through colonialization, and it's unfortunate that then that space was never really filled by all the Muslim countries coming together, forming the organization of the Islamic Cooperation or Commonwealth or whatever it's called, or the Gulf states trying to take a lead or whatever it was. No one actually filled that space in, and then that led to the rise of extremism. And their extremism was unfortunately an extremist revivalist of a kind of pseudo understanding of what Sharia is and what the Khilafah were, and that gave rise to Al-Qaeda, that gave rise to Taliban, that gave rise to, and then it fundamentally gave rise to what we have now, Daesh, and we're suffering from essentially, and I believe that we're suffering from the consequences of the Ottoman breakdown. Even though the Caliphate, I mean, many would argue the Caliphate had already broken down a century before it actually formally broke down, because it had moved away from its Islamic roots. But despite that, it was still the strongman in the area. It was still the strongman that kind of everyone was looking towards. That it was the place where Muslims were looking towards. And it's unfortunate that it broke down. And then obviously we have the situation we have today. Now, we're running out of time, but very quickly, just for everyone's understanding, Sister Nafisa is writing a book on Islamic history. I mean, I'm actually super excited to read it. And that leads straight into my question and last question, is how do we revive Islamic history within our lives as Muslim adults, but then importantly into our Muslim children, through the masajid, through the home, whatever it may be, because the resources are very slim. There's not a lot of Muslims who've done a lot of work in the subject.
Just to touch on my book, and this is an effort to kind of make Islamic history more accessible to parents, to the youth, to teenagers. I'm writing this book, inshallah, to it's kind of I've gathered all my knowledge that I've kind of acquired in the last 3 years, and I want to produce this easy to understand book, which kind of takes academic sources but writes it in the language that the mainstream Muslim, the majority Muslims can understand.
Yes. And
the reason I want to do that is because I understand that not everyone's gonna kind of read volumes of history books, on Salahuddin al-Ayyubi or a certain period, and that's how it is when you're looking into this information. It is volumes of books.
Yeah.
So inshallah, I'm writing this book to kind of just make things, like simplify things and give people a foundation.
Brilliant.
But going back to your question, it's very important that we do teach our children about their Islamic history, and we do start to find creative ways and innovative ways to take this information and to create content, and that's what my project is about. I know that there are more people now coming out with storytelling.
Yes,
there's like
definitely.
homeschooling communities that are looking into Islamic history now and teaching children. I do workshops, I do presentations. I take bookings to do these things in schools because I really believe in it. I feel that just how I was that child in that classroom who never felt validated, I don't want that for my ummah. I don't want that for the children of our ummah. I want them to feel proud of wearing their hijab and, validated in that identity that, what, our ancestors were amazing and, Muslims are amazing and we can do so much.
Definitely.
So it's about confidence building, really. It's about creating role models, creating a sense of belonging, and undoing the damage that, a lot of the things that have happened to us, we've been colonized. The damage is still there. We need to understand who we are now, and we need to move forward and start understanding the world that we live in. Inshallah, it's very confusing times, but we're hopeful as Muslims, and our history provides us with that hope as well.
Yes, definitely. I mean, I'd like to thank Sister Nafisa for coming in. I'd really, really recommend checking out her Twitter and her website, Islamic History Project. There's loads of great articles there. It's a great foundation to start. There's loads of books out there, and I guess there's lots of. I mean, I was just walking out the house and I saw Islam Channel are doing this series on Hazrat Ibrahim alayhi salam. It's a cartoon series. It's in Arabic, but there's got English translation. Just like, everyone's watching Ertugrul. It's in Turkish, but everyone's reading the translation. So, there's loads of great stuff coming. There's not a lot, but you know what? It's a good start, and I think if everyone does a little bit, it will go a long way to kind of provide the source and the connection to our children and to ourselves with our great Islamic past, with our golden age. So I'd like to thank Sister Nafisa for coming on the show. This has been Ramadan FM 2018. Do check our Twitter, our Facebook, our YouTube. We are running 24 hours a day. There's many great shows, and inshallah there's a great show next, Al Ihsan, for the Iftari show. So ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, thank you very much for tuning in. This has been a great show. I've learnt a lot. I hope and I'm sure that everyone else has learnt a lot, and inshallah we should do this again on Ottoman. Thank you very much, Sister Nafisa.